Welcome to September 1st Juried Exhibition Night from the Channel City Camera Club. I'm glad to see all of our club members here, and welcome back from the dark month in August. I hope you all had a restful time and took care of yourself. Tonight we have 69 images and 2 videos and 1 unscored. So we will get started right away. I'm going to turn it over to Stuart to introduce our 3 judges.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Our first judge is Kimberly Cavish. She has a BA in art from UC Davis and attended Brooks Institute from 1977 to 1979. She's been working in graphic design and photography ever since, as a business owner of Kimberly Cavish Design and Photography, as well as a partner with her brother Michael in Cavish and Cavish. From 1986 to 2000, Kimberly served as art director at Santa Barbara Magazine and as creative director for Photographers Forum magazine from 2000 to 2018. Her studio manages projects of many sizes and scope, including brochures, newsletters, fundraising packages, promotional materials, books, magazines, and other publications. So Kimberly, thank you so much for being our judge tonight. Just say a word so we can all see you show up on the screen.
Hi, yes, I'm happy to help promote photography. So am I coming through okay?
Yes,
It's
you
fine. Are. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Our other pro judge is Christopher Broughton. Chris completed both a BA and MS in photography at Brooks Institute and then returned to serve as a faculty member for over 20 years. He taught courses in digital photography, digital asset management, view camera, studio, zone system, fine art, and photographic theory. One of the highlights of his teaching career was the opportunity to spend 5 summers as a Brooks professor in Paris. Chris has continued taking students to Paris, now with Mount St. Mary's University, for the last 2 summers, and will continue once the pandemic is over. He's currently teaching in the photography program at Antelope Valley College and photography courses through the Ernest Brooks Foundation's collaboration with UCSB Professional and Continuing Education Center. So Chris, thank you so much for being our judge tonight.
My pleasure, thank you.
Okay, and our club judge tonight is Bob Rottenberg. Bob's interest in photography began when he received a Kodak Hawkeye at age 13, but he believes the most important date in his photographic career was when he joined the Channel City Camera Club in 2002. Bob is one of our most outstanding photographers in the club. And thank you, Bob, for being our judge.
My pleasure.
And away we go.
There's our scoring rubric, which we've all seen before. Altered reality submissions. This is our first category. And the first image is Blowing Bubbles, and the critique is by Kimberly Cavish.
So I think it's a very fun image, the idea of being inside the bubble. And when I first saw this, my only question was, why has the photographer not cropped in on it so that, you know, when you zoom in on it, you can see that there's some architectural, almost colonnade in the left-hand gleam on the bottom left and on the upper right that are pretty interesting, but those are pretty dismissed at the scale, and there's nothing about having all of that blue area around it that does anything. I would almost just blow it right up and make a square image out of it, and I thought it was very creative and fun, and my only criticism was that it should have been cropped.
All right, and the score?
The score for Blowing Bubbles is 22.
Our next image is Palm Trees Poster, and this is a critique from Robert Rottenberg.
Yeah, I think this image has terrific graphic quality. I love the posterization and the limitation of the colors to the kind of purplish blue, orange, and lavender. I can see this as a poster, but although the format is a little bit tall, I think there are two things I might do to improve this image even more. One would be to just crop a bit off the bottom to get it more to kind of poster dimensions or aspect ratio. I'm also a little bit conflicted about the palm tree in the upper right-hand corner. To me, it's a bit of a distraction. I love the palms in the middle, which looks like Cabrillo Boulevard. The other thing that kind of draws my eye, and maybe not in a good way, is the kind of orange fringing of all of the palms. I almost wish that weren't there and it was just the dark blue palms against the lavender sky.
Right, and the score.
Actually, the name of the image is Cabrillo Palms, and the score
Okay.
20. 2-0.
Our next image is Floater in Sunset, critique by Christopher Broughton.
You know, when I first saw this, I thought, what a wonderful kind of three-dimensional abstract. I kept wanting to make a shape in my mind of the trimmings, I guess you could say. I kept wanting to make that be either an apple or a shoe, and I'm not really sure why. My only comment or creative comment was when I looked at, or actually suggestive change would be when I looked at the sun, or what I perceived as being the sun or the glowing orb in the distance, I wasn't quite sure why it wasn't round. It's an oval, and that leads me to a departure from it being a sun at all. I really enjoyed the complementary colors, the cyan, blue, and the yellow. And since it is a complete abstract, or I would almost say almost like an illustration, I just was really kind of curious if I was ever supposed to know what it was. And what was the title again, Bill?
The title is Floater in Sunset.
Okay, so I thought there was a grounding in reality of the sunset, and that's what really kind of threw me off a little bit. Was the sun was not a round circle, it was an oval, and I just thought I might just make that one correction. That was my suggestion.
Can I make one brief comment?
Sure.
To me, it would be more effective if the floater looked like it was being lit by the sun. Somehow the colors are a little cooler, although the light direction is correct. It just doesn't look like it's been lit by the sun, which I think would make it a little more coherent from a purely design point of view.
Okay. The
All
score.
right. Floater in Sunset scored 21.
Our next image is Goatees, and this is critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I really like this image, and although I have to say that I guess in terms of an altered reality, what makes it altered is the texture that has been brought to the background, as well as the fact that it's gone, you know, almost like a selenium tone type image. And the curiosity of the fact that the goats seem to be kissing the man, and he's so stoic and just looking straight ahead as if there's no reaction. And it compels me to want to know what is the story, what's going on here. And then from a technical standpoint, I like the contrast and the values that the photographers brought to it. And I also like the fact that they left the bowls and part of the mat in the lower right to give it some grounding, because I can see on the left-hand side, I think they must have dropped out what was ever in the background of the original photograph. But keeping the bowls there just sort of gives it grounding. And it's just it's a very interesting image.
Okay, goatees scored 24.
All right, the next image is Highway 154 viewpoint. The critique is Robert Rottenberg.
I think this is a really interesting image. It's all about color. It's interesting that it's a landscape, but it's been made into a study of color and form. And as I look at it closely, I think, I'm not 100% sure, that this was all done in camera by some vertical camera movements and some horizontal camera movements. And I think that's, really interesting. It's not really a criticism, but I love the complementary reddish tones and green tones, which really go together very nicely. I almost think it would work better for me without the sky and just make it into a study of color and tone. The sky makes it a little bit more of a literal landscape, and but I'm not even 100% sure of that. Looks like it was done in the San Ynez in the past. A really interesting concept.
Okay, Highway 154 viewpoint scored 19.
All
So
right.
for altered reality, we have 3 accepted images. Blowing Bubbles by Carrie Topliff. Floater in Sunset, Innes Roberts. And Goatees, Jeff Lipschitz.
All right, that's the end of the categories accepted images. Our next category is nature. And the first image is, more paparazzi, Christopher Broughton critique.
So one of the things that I can't express enough is the idea of the subject and the background, the figure-ground relationship, and to me, when we have this majestic animal kind of almost crushed up against the background, I wish there was a way that we could separate the two. I don't know if that's a longer lens with a shallower depth of field. I don't know if this is a captive animal or an animal in the wild. So I don't know if we could actually move to the left or to the right, or get a different vantage point where we don't actually have the tree or the plant material coming out of the top of the lioness. I think it's a lioness, is head. And to me, that is the crucial element is that how can I separate the two? And I just wish there was a way to push that background back in space or find a different point. The other thing too is that being ultra critical, this image does not appear sharp. Now, that might be the image that they uploaded. That might be the way that the images on Flickr or Zoom. But some of the images, I saw an eye of a fly with individual little cell details. So I have a feeling that this person might just want to double check that how they're getting the image uploaded is not destroying it, because it does seem to be a little bit soft.
All right, more paparazzi scored 18.
Next image is Anna's Rose, critique by Kimberly Cavish.
I really liked this image, and I like the fact that the photographer cropped it as a square. I like the fact that the background, not only is it out of focus, but it's this interesting, compelling kind of gray blue that I think enhances the green and the rose-colored rose. And it also sort of adds a mystery to it. And I also really like the way that lower right bud is pointing right to the almost swallowtail element of the hummingbird's tail. It kind of creates a certain tension, and it also, to me, makes, whether it was inadvertent or not, it makes it feel as if the photographer paid inordinate amount of attention to nail this image in the way that they did. it's almost like a decisive moment. And then it's incredibly tack sharp, and yet you still have the movement of the wings, which, you know, hummingbirds move so quickly that I think a lot of effort had to be made to get this tack sharp image that also continues to contain an element of movement. So I think it's very nicely done.
Right, Ann's Rose scored 24.
If I could add one thing, Bill, I found a little intriguing. I live with a biologist and an uber smart science person, and it was interesting that this hummingbird, which normally feeds on nectar, is actually inspecting a flower that they wouldn't normally feed from, and that's just something that I find intriguing when we have animals in nature. That what they're juxtaposed against makes sense. And this was just out of the ballpark interesting.
Zoltan, did you give the score? You did.
Yes, I did. The score was 24.
Okay, the next image is Are You a Threat? And this is critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Yeah, this is a charming image of this, I think, capuchin monkey. The pose is wonderful. The monkey is staring directly at the photographer. I love the tail curled around what looks like a palm trunk, and the position of the hands. I have only one suggestion on this image, and I think I would crop it a little bit, top and bottom, just so that the monkey, which is just wonderful, were a larger part of the frame. I think that would strengthen the image a little bit and would create more immediacy.
Okay, Are You a Threat scored 25.
Our next image is B. The critique is from Chris Broughton.
You know, I can't think of anything more difficult to get of a hummingbird or maybe a bee in flight. And the interesting thing is, you know, when I look at this photograph, it makes me want to go in there. It makes me want to go in and actually look even closer at the bee. And again, this is one of those things that I look at this photograph and I compare it to other images of bees and insects in flight. This image here might be just slightly not quite as sharp, and that's because you guys have ones in this lot that are actually sharper. So that's something to think about. The other thing too is that I love the spatial relationship of where you've put the bee within the frame. In other words, you've given this bee this wonderful space to hover, and then we know where it's going because we see the draw of the colored plants. So to me, the positioning of the bee in the space is wonderful. You know, if the image is to show nature in her ultimate glory, meaning that in her perfection, a couple of the flowers down at the bottom are past their prime. So I don't know if a slight, even tighter crop might eliminate some of those things at the bottom. But I love where the bee is put in space.
Okay, B scored 23.
Next image is Canyonland Overlook, and this is critiqued by Kimberly Kavish.
I think this is, you know, it's a classic West photograph. It would have been one of those classic images in Sunset magazine. And I have no criticism other than, well, I have no criticism of it. I think it's, you know, it's sharp. It has great color balance and exposure. And I like the fact that the arch, the lighting's coming from the back and under the arch. And, you know, sometimes just to enhance it, because it's such a horizontal, you know, it could be slightly, you could almost turn it into even more of a panorama by cropping slightly in on the bottom just to give it even more tension. But that's a minimum consideration. I think overall it's been nicely shot and well done, and the clouds in the sky give it a lot of texture and interest, and well done.
All right, Canyonland Overlook scored 21.
The next image is Cliffs of Erita, critique from Robert Rottenberg. My apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong.
Well, you know, it's a fool's errand to try to photograph white birds in bright sunshine, but this is pretty successful. The bodies are a little bit blown out, but the position of the birds in the frame and the interaction between the birds is really quite beautiful. I mean, I think in the best of all worlds, if I had 15 frames to pick from, and you might have a little bit of more separation between the birds with a little patch of blue between them, might have been nice. I kind of have mixed feelings about the cliff, not its presence in the frame, but the fact that it's so bright. And I think that would be a relatively easy fix in Photoshop. And that would be the only thing I might do. I might try to recover some of the feather detail or highlights in the bird. That may not be possible because of the lighting, but I think I would burn down the cliffs just a bit. I'd like the positioning of the birds in the frame.
Okay, Cliffs of Etretat, I'll go the same pronunciation as you, Bill, scored 22.
All right, next image is
Hello.
Clouded In, critique from Christopher Broughton.
So one of the things I think is paramount when we look at images of the landscape is to have a subject matter, to have a focal point. And to me, this is an amazing vista. But I used to subscribe to Alpine Magazine, and to me, you know, the whole idea of high altitude mountaineering. And the first thing I did was I looked at the slopes on the left to try to see if there was a climber. I tried to look in the sky to see if there was a plane or anything. And I would like it. I think it would be a stronger image if there was a center focal point, either the single peak in the mist in the background or the single cliff on the left, because to me, it's an amazing scape, but I'm not exactly sure, besides the background, what the wonderful landscape photograph is. Maybe you're showing me too much. Maybe I would like to see just a little bit less. Now, it could be photographed from an airplane. I really don't know. I just know it's high altitude. And the only other little thing is the horizon line in the background, the kind of the swoop of the clouds themselves. I might just come in and chop that off for uniformity, because it makes me want to think that the sky's crooked. And I know it's not. I know it's the storm front or the way the weather pattern is. But that's kind of my comment. I guess if this was a Red Bull competition photograph, and by the way, if you guys want to see high adventure photographs of extremes, there would be a person this big on that sunlit slope on the left-hand side of the screen, because it's about the human element in nature.
Okay, Clouded In scored 20.
Next image is Decay. This is critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I really like the saturation of this and the mood of it. It almost looks as though they've bounced light coming from the perspective of the camera. They've bounced some light in, almost like there's almost as if it's a glow of a fill light. Whether that's true or not, it just adds a certain mysteriousness to it, and mood and softness. And the colors are very compelling. I like the way the blue is coming in through the sky blue coming in from the very top. And if you've ever been around sequoias, you could almost feel as if you could smell it. And so I think, and again, I like it that it was cropped like a square. It makes that stump sort of heroic, and it really honors that tree. It's great.
Right, DK scored 20.
Next image is Dragonfly, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
From a purely technical point of view, this image is terrific. It's very unusual. I've photographed a few dragonflies to get them with their wings in this position. It's almost parallel with the focal plane, which is kind of counterintuitive since this is a side view. But hey, more power to the photographer. The color palette, to me, is just a little bit unusual. It's all yellows and oranges. I'm not quite sure why that is. Even the dragonfly's eye, which I would expect to be bright red or kind of a ruby color, has a kind of an orangey yellowish cast to it. So I'm not sure why that is. I think this would be a little bit stronger if the crop were not quite so symmetric. The dragonfly is almost geometrically in the center of the frame. So I probably would have left a little bit more room on the left. Also, the background, it almost looks like it was shot against a wall or a brownish foam core. It just doesn't look terribly natural. But I mean, certainly an excellent tack sharp capture.
I just wanted to add something that just occurred to me in looking at this. I wonder if this dragonfly and that piece that it's standing on was caught in the fire. It almost looks slightly scorched, like someone found it and then just picked it up to photograph it rather than it being alive.
Interesting concept, with the position of the wings is really unusual.
Right, and they look scorched.
Dragonfly scored 23.
Our next image is Haskell's Beach, Low Tide, critique by Christopher Broughton.
To me, this wonderful, wonderful abstract image, it reminds me a little bit of Medusa's hair. One of the things I find fascinating is I'm looking at my monitor up here, and I have my laptop open down here, and my laptop, for some reason, when I look at them simultaneously, it displays it about a stop and a half darker and really yellow. And when you add that to that image, and you just go beyond the literal to the really abstract, I think it takes it almost to the surrealist type movement. So my only advice would be, I love the palette. I would just yank the clarity all the way to the right, and drop it down about a full stop, and just explore. Because to me, it's such a wonderful, wonderful texture. I just want to enhance that texture a little bit more. But I think this is a beautiful photograph.
All right, Bill, I have the title here just as Haskell's Beach. You have it as Haskell's Beach, Low Tide?
Yeah,
Okay. Haskell's Beach, Low Tide scored 23.
next image is Hoodoo, critiqued by Kimberly Kavich.
This is a fascinating formation of rocks. They remind me of the Easter Island rocks. And I think they've picked a lovely time of day to photograph them so that they don't have that high contrast you would have if they were sunlit. There's something very soft and moody about it. And the only thing I would say is, again, if the photographer came in and cropped slightly up from the bottom and there's nothing about the rock that's below or in the lower left-hand corner that does anything for the image. And it could be, just take the viewer much more to the three gentlemen, as it were. And then it may be that you would have to slightly do a rotation toward the left because they feel as if, the horizon feels like it wants to be neutralized a little bit better. but I like the tone and I like the clouds in the sky. And it's a nice portrait of some rocks.
Okay, Hoodoos scored 19.
Next image is Hungry Bee, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Okay, this is it's tack sharp and it's beautifully composed. The top-down view of the bee is really interesting. The flower that he has landed on is quite beautiful. I like the slightly out of focus flower in the top left, and I love the flower bud. So everything about the composition I think is perfect, and from a technical photographic point of view, a really excellent capture. The thing that I think could be improved here is the post-processing. At least on my monitor, it's a little bit dark, and I would like to see especially the bee's body and the eyes a little bit brighter. And to me, the vignetting is really, really, you shouldn't notice the vignette in an image in most cases. If your eye goes to the vignette, I think it's been overdone a little bit, and I think it's a little bit too heavy in this case, and that the image could be brightened up just a little bit.
Okay, Hungry Bee scored 23.
Next image is Incoming, critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
You know, to me, I love the idea and the inclusion of motion within the frame. To me, I think motion is one of those things that is just as much about a photography as a sharp image. And I was fascinated by this image because I think they actually panned with the photograph, because I zoomed in and it's like the pelican's eye is sharp and yet there's some movement in the back. So kudos for the technical achievement. I'm just a little bit more of a person that likes a little bit more space. And whether or not a little bit more space on the right or the left, I would play with either of those. I just don't want to feel too cramped. And yes, you've done an amazing job that you've got in close, but I just like to see the whole dance. And sometimes that means just a little bit more space around the image itself. But if anybody wants to see a sharp bird in flight and zoom into this thing, and you guys hopefully can go on Flickr and compare your images, you definitely should, especially some of the ones of the bees and the eyeballs that are sharp, or just like, that's what you guys need to go for. But nice image, I like it, very nice.
Okay, Incoming scored 22.
Next image is Julia Longwing, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
This is just such a pristine, perfect image, from the contrasting colors, the grays, the oranges, and the green and the grays. And then the graphic element of the sage bush that's out of focus in the back and then comes into focus where the moth or the butterfly is standing. It's just this, it's almost like the type of composition that you can do in painting, because you have so much time to manipulate everything. And it's just flawless, right down to the antenna, if that's what they're called, the right hand antenna of the butterfly that you're aware of as it crosses that gray area of the sage in the back. And you can almost just feel its delicate little legs landing on that unbelievably sharp focused sage in the foreground. And the fact that it's backlit, so you can see all of the little details in those delicate wings. It's just a beautiful, perfect image.
All right, Julia Longwing scored 24.
Next image is Nature's Design, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
This is a really beautiful image. I'm particularly intrigued by the little filamentous hair-like structures that come off I think they come off the edge of the palm leaf. This is an image that, and I think that's the most interesting graphic element in this image. And I think it's most interesting on the right-hand side of the frame. And if this were my image, I probably would crop this as a square and include only the right-hand part of the frame, where you have these wonderful, graceful, sinuous, filamentous elements against the green palm fronds. I think the second frond in the background, which is very, very bright, is almost for me is almost a distraction, or it's another frame, and you crop it the other way and have the little filaments against the yellow background. But actually, I think it's the right-hand side of the frame that works best for me.
Okay, Bob, Nature's Design scored 22.
Next image is Pest or Pollinator, critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
This is your litmus test for sharpness. I don't know how they did it, but to me, it goes without saying that your photograph should be sharp and in focus. That having something, there's nothing worse than a sharp photograph of a fuzzy concept. And to me, it should be required. And so we don't have to talk about it. To me, the background, the way that the right hand upper corner is balanced with the bee itself. My only comment was I think you guys are allowed to do slight dodging and burning. And I just might have darkened the left-hand edge of the yellow flower just a little bit to push it back into space, to kind of hold that fly up on the pedestal of the trophy, and show it in its best light. If I squint, and usually when I look at images, I squint, that way your eye goes to the lightest and brightest area. It tends to pull me off to the lower left-hand corner of the frame, and I would just kind of hide that a little bit. I gave my students a little test today, and they had to take a photograph of something in the foreground and something in the background, and they had to focus on the foreground, and they had to focus in the background. And when things in the foreground go out of focus, they naturally go lighter. That's counterintuitive to our brain. And so that plant on the left-hand side, I just might naturally darken it a little bit so it doesn't distract me. But I can't imagine I don't know how close they were to the fly, because they must have been about that far away.
All right, Pest or Pollinator scored 22.
Next image is Tail of a Whale, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
When I first saw this, I love the movement. I love the color. I love the graphicness of it. And it could well be one of those situations where the photographer was on board and a whale showed up, and they weren't quite ready, and they just sort of grabbed it. And again, I'm speculating because maybe it was intended to be one of these shots where they didn't necessarily feel as if they needed the animal to be sharp, because it was just all about movement. But either way, I mean, even, in a sense, that dark wave that's in the upper left-hand side just becomes this beautiful design element in line with the tail, in line with the spray from the tail. And to me, it just illustrates everything about ocean and everything about animals that live and swim in the water. And like Chris just mentioned, I would have almost, I think at one point in time said, but you should have been ready for the shot and had focus going. But I think this is just incredibly successful, just like it is.
Okay, Tail of a Whale scored 24.
Next image is Three Turtles and a Spare, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Okay, this is really a fun image. my eye is drawn to the repetition of the three senior fellows in the middle of the frame. I think that the junior in the lower right, to me, is actually a distraction. And if there were four turtles in a row, so much the better. From a purely photographic point of view, I think the image is a little bit hot. There are some very bright specular highlights both on the rock and on the carapace of the turtles and on their heads. It would be even better if all three heads were perfectly aligned, but I guess that would be too much to ask. Now, this is a case where I would darken down the middle, try to recover some of those specular highlights, and add a little bit of a subtle vignette to draw your eye in. It's also a little bit tight on the bottom of the frame. I wish that the rock had been totally included. It looks like a shot that was made in nature, not in the little turtle pond in La Arcata. And I love the background.
All right, three turtles and a spare, scored 19.
Next image is Upward Bound, critique by Christopher Broughton.
You know, the backlighting that you guys doing is just amazing. The butterfly wings that were backlit. Here we have an amazing sunflower vignette that's backlit. My only comment that I might do is I might see if we can't change the position of the center band of the green leaves and the bottom of the stem. The bottom of the stem seems to be just a little bit light, and the band of the green leaves seems to be just a little bit dark. And I think we're allowed to do a little dodge and a little burn there, just to kind of move the relationship of those two things slightly apart. And I think if you did that, the image would have a greater illusion of dimensionality, because right now I feel that the bottom of the stem is fighting for my attention just because of the lightness of the small little spines, and I want to just rest in the glory of the yellow leaves themselves.
All right, Upward Bound scored 22.
Next image, this is Wren Chicks, and Robert Rottenberg, you're doing this one.
I have no idea how this capture was made. This is a bird's eye view of a bird's eye, or actually I think there are actually 4 bird's eyes in that nest. And I think, I don't know how this image has been manipulated. It's neither quite black and white or quite in color. And I'm not quite sure why the photographer made the choice to vignette this so heavily so that the nest is not included, because I think the nest is really an important part of the storytelling here. These are I think 4 wrens in a nest. One of them is a little bit out of focus. I'm a little bit puzzled by the post-processing. This is the nature category, I believe. Are we still in nature?
Yes.
And it just doesn't look natural to me. In fact, it looks quite unnatural.
All right, so Wren Chicks scored 16.
This is What Do You Want? And Kim, this is Kimberly, this is your critique.
Okay, yeah, I love the monochromaticness of it. The fact that you can see some feathers here and there, as if perhaps this bird is a fledgling, I'm not sure. The fact that the background it just enhances it because it's so out of focus. You really go to the eye of the bird. And the only thing about it, again, is that all of the, if it could be, and I believe in this category you're allowed to do that, is just to come in much tighter on the crop, because you could come in a great deal and you're not losing anything of the mood of it and the attention to the bird. So yeah, that was my comment.
All right, what do you want scored 20? So for the nature category, we have 14 accepted images. First one is Anne's Rose by Don Green. Are You a Threat? Ron Abeles. B, Michael Rothschild. Canyonland Overlook, Bob Wagoner. Cliffs of Etretat, Dave Basso. Dragonfly, Bill Hallier. Haskell's Beach Low Tide, Bill Banning. Hungry Bee, Zoltan Pushkash. Incoming, Chris Seaton. Julia Longwing, George Wellick. Nature's Design, Steve Sherrill. Pest or Pollinator, John Stupnagel. Tale of a Whale, Bob Rottenberg. And Upward Bound, Ron Williams. And that concludes that category.
Okay, our next category is open. And the first image is Agapanthus, critique from Christopher Broughton.
So I thought this was a rather intriguing kind of visual play. The only question that I have is really the direction of the shadows or the drop shadows. It played a little bit with my head because the drop shadows actually go outward, and how do they go outward? That would mean that the light source is right next to it. And I played around with it on my computer just to try to see if I just reduce the density of that, of those drop shadows. I thought the translucent effect or the ethereal effect of the background became more pleasing. So I thought this was a lot of fun, kind of an abstract, a little bit surreal. My only suggestion would be just take those deep shadows and slide that Lightroom slider over a little bit, and I think it would make it even more ethereal.
Okay, Agapanthus scored 20.
Next image is Bluffs at Santa Barbara Shores, critique by Kimberly Cavish.
It's a lovely time of day. It certainly gives you a sense of place, you know, with the, I think those are mustard plants. But I found myself feeling like there was a little bit of a lack of focus or attention to where I should be looking. You know, the figure on the beach is very small and almost insignificant. So in some ways, I would have almost taken a pretty significant crop off of the bottom just to make one's eye go either more into the vista, because I'm not sure anything in the foreground, the dry scrub in the foreground enhances anything that you're trying to say here. And then even for that matter, you could even break this up into a number of images, because if you cropped it straight down the middle and then slightly up from the bottom, you have kind of an interesting point of view of the cliffs going down to the beach. You still have the sky, you still have the ocean line. That would be one photograph. Another one could just be cropping on the other side. It would even be interesting just to see the mustard plants going into the sky with the figure on the beach. And again, take off that background. On a positive note, I think the lighting is lovely and the mood of it is lovely.
All right, thank you. Bluffs at Santa Barbara Shores scored 20.
Next image is Book Cliffs View This is critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Hey, to me, this image looks something like it should appear in a Chamber of Commerce brochure for this, whatever town that is in the midground. I think as a landscape, I can't get my eyes off those bright white buildings in the midground. I think that I think it's either a pinyon pine or a juniper on the cliff edge is really where the image is. I think that could be a really beautiful image with the cliffs in the background and this beautiful sky. So perhaps if the photographer had gotten a little bit lower and it only had the juniper and the ledge that it's on and the sky and the bluffs in the background in the frame, that it would have been more successful. But I'm not sure what class to put this image in with all the structures in the middle of the frame.
Okay, Book Cliff's View scored 19.
Next image is California, critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
To me, this was a wonderful, wonderful silhouette, time of day, very strong figure-ground relationship. It was, I would say, one of the most pleasing images to look at. My only teeny little criticism would be that when we do portraits of people, we don't chop them off at the ankles. And it's not chopped off at the ankles. It's just that the shadows are a little bit dark to see his feet. And I played with it on my monitor. I just lifted the shadows just a tinge, and then you can actually see the legs continue on to the ground. But that's my only comment. I love the position of the surfer. I love the silhouette of the guard shack, the setting sun, the saturation of the sky. I thought was very beautiful.
Okay, California scored 25.
Next photograph is Coffee Break 2020, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I like the graphicness of this urban perspective, and it's sort of feels Hopper-esque, but and I spent some time looking at it, and I liked the graphicness of it, but over and over again, my eye kept going to the face of the woman in the mural in the lower left. And with that in mind, I found myself feeling as though it might have been a more successful photograph if the photographer even moved just slightly to the left, slightly to the left, and then lowered the perspective slightly so that the face and the mural would have had the strength in the image, which it's pretty much commanding. And I think that the Red Cross crosses, the Starbucks sign, the Ward sign, those things sort of enhance the idea of an urban landscape, but they're not the dominant element. The dominant element is the face in the mural. And I think the whole image could be remedied simply by just having slightly shifted the point of view of the camera.
Okay, thank you. Coffee Break 2020 scored 18.
Next image is Dawn at Hendry's Beach. And this is critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
But I think that one of the most remarkable things about this image, and I really like the image, is that the photographer got to this place on the beach just as the light was breaking that cliff edge. And it's a perfect moment. And it only occurred for probably 15 or 20 seconds. I think, I'm not sure if this was handheld or whether with a drag shutter or was shot from a tripod. And I kind of like the slight motion blur in the ocean and the waves. I almost wish that it were a little bit more blurred so that that were a little bit more abstract. The one thing that I find myself longing for is for something in the foreground that is sharp and in focus and not blurred. We have those three rocks in the lower left-hand corner, but the leftmost rock is not completely included in the frame. And I just think that this image would sing even more if it had a stronger foreground element.
Okay, thank you. Dawn at Hendry's Beach scored 21.
Next image is Eye of the Needle, critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
When I first looked at this, I looked at it as more of an abstract. I enjoyed the idea of the ellipses cut out. I at first thought, when I read the title, I thought of the Magritte painting from the inside of the eye, looking out onto the city. The one little thing that kind of was a detractor for me was the technical aspects of it. You know, if the axis of the horizon is a little bit off, I would either Dutch it even further, or I would make it level. I would somehow figure out a way to either pull the depth of field of the right side of the eyelid, I guess you could say, because typically with architecture type photographs, typically even with landscape photographs, elements in the foreground should be sharp and allowed the background to go slightly out of focus. And the other thing that was kind of interesting is there's the inclusion of two slices of two people, both on the right lower portion of the eye and on the left lower portion of the eye. And to me, I either want to see all of them or I want to see none of them. And you know, to me, the idea, the conceptual idea, I think is there. I just think it might need some refinement.
All right, thank you. Eye of the Needle scored 17.
Next image is Garden Fresh, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
This is just beautiful and hard to believe that it's actually a photograph. It looks so painterly. It looks, I kept finding myself thinking, is this a painting that was photographed as opposed to a photograph that was manipulated to look like a painting? So let's just assume it was a photograph that was manipulated, and whoever did this did an astonishingly wonderful job. The light is beautiful. The feel of the ceramic is there. The sense of the sheen on the tomatoes, even the feel of the cloth that it's sitting on. And then when you look in the background, that element, whatever it was originally that's stripping through in the back, it looks like paint strokes. So I feel like the feel of it, the balance of it is just lovely. And since it's in an open category, I guess it's perfectly acceptable that it's been pushed this far. So I thought it was lovely.
Okay, thank you. Garden Fresh scored 21.
Next image is Gentle Touch, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Yeah, I really like this image. I like that the photographer has chosen a portion of the scene to represent the whole scene. Obviously, the scene is somebody playing the cello. There are a few choices that the photographer made that I probably would have made differently. I'm a little bit perplexed is too strong a word. The choice of a panoramic crop, I think it gets your attention, but it draws great attention to the bow, to the exclusion of the instrument, which I think is really gorgeous, and to the hand. So I think a more conventional crop, either a vertical crop or a less landscape type crop would have worked just a little bit better. I think the texture of the instrument is just beautiful. The highlights are lovely. The detail in the bow is beautiful. The hand to me seems a little bit ghostly. It's very, very bright and kind of flat. And I think all the information is there in the file. I would like to see the shadows on the hand a little bit darker and the overall luminosity of the hand a little bit darker also. Perhaps the whole frame just a little bit darker. I wonder what the other judges feel about the crop.
To me, the interesting thing about the crop is that, you know, you're starting to chop into people and you're starting to chop into instruments. And it's an aesthetic. I agree with what you said about the hand. What I would do though is I would switch the relationship between the hand and the bowstrings. I would lighten the bowstrings to create that strong vertical tension and darken the hand. And I think they would switch positions within the frame. But, you know, I'm not objectionable to the crop because I'm looking at it as the bow, not as the cello.
And to me, it's a little bit, you know, it'd be interesting to know how it would have worked had the hand simply been a different perspective or a different angle, because at the moment you're looking at it so straight on that it almost becomes, I don't know if you're old enough to remember that show, The Addams Family, but it's,
Yeah.
you know.
That's what I meant by ghostly.
Yeah. And I think if the hand were even slightly turned, it would have more dimension the way that the cello does, and it wouldn't be as disturbing. Or even if it had been, you know, had the player, there'd been more of the arm or even less of the arm, maybe just the fingers from another angle. But, you know, the detail is certainly nice.
Okay, Gentle Touch scored 23.
Next image is Goleta Slough. This is critiqued by Chris Broughton.
You know, to me, amazing, proficient use of the camera. I love the linear motion that we have following the edge of the rushing wave as it's coming in. My only slight technical critique is that I would figure out a way just to lighten the bird just a little bit, and I think it would levitate off of the background a little bit more. And to me, I'm all about space. I would have probably allowed another third space to the left just to move the bird further along in the frame. And because to me, this is all about linear motion, and it would feel like it came in. So a little bit lighter on the bird, and if I had my truthers, I would add more space to the left-hand side, just a little bit.
All right, Goleta Slough scored 21.
Next image is Hangers On, critique by Kimberly Cavish.
I think this is just a fun image in the sense that I'm always fascinated when I see trees that have been upended. You know, you feel as if you're getting this perspective on the center of the earth that you don't normally see, particularly on a stump of this size. And it's tacked sharp. It's got the way it almost looks like it's illuminated by the headlights of a car or something. And so it has even a threatening quality to it. But I also found myself, as I was looking at it, thinking, I wish I could just see a little bit more detail in the shadow, even though I know that the effect is supposed to be this, you know, nighttime scene. I think seeing a little bit more detail in the blacks would have given it just that much more dimensionality. But the sharpness of it, and also the lack of branches in the middle, almost gives you this feeling that you could climb up the stump and then just keep going right through the center of it, which adds a lot of interest and mystery to it and gives it shape that's, again, fascinating.
Okay, thank you. Hangers On scored 22.
Next image is In Peril, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
I think this image has great graphic interest. I love the use of color. You know, the red, white, and blue, but the blue is not quite blue. It's kind of a muddy off blue, and the diagonal of the red and white stripe of flag is very strong and gives it a very graphic image. I'm not sure what this is a picture of. I'm not sure if this is a picture of a picture or a picture of a work of art, because I was puzzled by the puzzle. And at first I thought, well, maybe this was applied as a depth map after the fact. And then I really looked at it very, very, very carefully. And I don't think so. I think this is actually part of a work of art that somebody has photographed and cropped. I could be wrong there. But as a graphic work, I think it really works.
Right, In Peril scored 22.
Next image is Neowise Triptych, critiqued by Chris Broughton.
I'm glad people are getting out there and capturing the comment. You know, my true critique for this for this triptych. Today I talked to my students about diptychs, triptychs, and polyiptychs, more than 3. I was just kind of questioning the tail of the third of the triptych. In other words, the night sky with no horizon. I might just have rotated it just a little bit to follow the progression. And I see it's bending down, and then this one didn't quite follow. So if I had to critique it, I would say that maybe the sky rotation on the right image should match or be comparable to the fall of the previous 2 photographs.
Okay, Neowise Triptych scored 21.
Can I make one other comment? I'm not sure why this has to be a triptych. I think the center image is by far the strongest of the 3. And it's like the photographer took 3 wonderful pictures of these of this comet and wanted to show us all 3, when really the best one is the middle one, and I think it stands on its own. I don't think adding 2 more really adds to the impact.
Okay, next image is Path to Tree, and this is critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
When I reviewed these on my main computer, which has a pretty big screen, and I found myself kind of going in on this and trying to understand why the photographer, it's as if it's been enhanced, but I can't completely figure out why it needed to be. Was it because, or maybe I'm just suspect, but I felt as if it was enhanced because it wasn't sharp enough, and by manipulating it, you could create you could sort of fake a sharpness, as it were, by doing that. I'm not sure that's a good enough reason. I think the tree, in and of itself, the one thing it has going for it are the base of it, the branches, the way it looks like the way it started to grow as a young tree has a very fascinating way. It seemed to have fought the elements to survive. And they're just, I just kept going around and around with this one when I was making my notes about how to judge it. And I think that the tree on its own and the angle would have worked. And I'm not sure that the manipulation was warranted.
All right, thank you. Path to Tree scored 18.
Next image is Peekaboo. It's critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Okay, I think this is a adorable kid, and it's a a great moment. I love the boy peeking around the board. It actually looks much better on your screen, Bill, than it did on mine on the Zoom site where I'm sorry, on the Flickr site, where the hat was very, very bright. And I was a little critical of my own mind that the hat was too bright and was detracting from the little boy's face. And now that I see this file on your monitor, that no longer is a valid criticism. I think the pose is wonderful. The moment is wonderful. There's one thing that I think I would do. You know, we always talk about our eye going to the lightest and brightest thing in the frame, which in this case is the little boy's hat, but I don't find that particularly distracting. What I do find distracting is the black hole that is caused by the crack on the left-hand side. I think there's enough texture in the wall and in the post that he's, or structure that he's peeking around, that the, you know, not only does our eye go to the lightest and brightest things in the frame, sometimes it goes to the darkest thing in the frame, particularly when it's at the edge of the frame. And I think cropping that in from the left-hand side and down a little bit from the top would improve this image.
All right, thank you. Peekaboo scored 21.
Next image is Softness and Beauty, critiqued by Chris Broughton.
When I saw this image, I thought of a manufactured still life. You know, to me, I really enjoyed the high key kind of feeling to the pastel colors of the flowers, the high key nature of the fabric. If I was ultra critical, I would say that just the slight green undertones of the flower is just a little distracting to me. And since this is an open category, I would have figured out a way to either brush a different color into there or just remove the green altogether, just to concentrate on the high, kind of high key ethereal look to it. The romance and the idea of and the refinement of the flowers, I couldn't tell, at least from my monitor, what type of fabric that was. And to me, the fabric doesn't quite match the refinement of a flower. You know, to me, you know, the high count thread Egyptian cotton, or, you know, the sheerness of a fine real piece of silk just seemed to be more natural with this than almost a feltish like type fabric, which to me detracted a little bit from the elegance I think that we were trying to convey.
All right, Softness and Beauty scored 20.
Next image is Spoonbill, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I just think this is a beautiful image. I love the way that the water has just become almost like an impressionistic painting, and yet the detail on the bird, you still see enough ripple right around its legs to know that it's standing in water. So we surmise that this is a perfect reflection. And the fact that the bird, it's all your attention goes to the blue bill and the white body, because it's just that it's got that perfect sort of balance between keeping something so soft but having enough contrast to add excitement and separation. And I found myself saying, well, maybe it should be more of a vertical, because do you really need all of the area to the left? But I actually think the space just enhances the stillness of the bird. And it's just a beautiful image and beautifully done.
All right, thank you. Spoonbill scored 23.
Next image is Star Reflections, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
This is an intriguing subject. These red starfish reflected in the still water below. Unlike the previous image, though, I don't think the reflection is nearly as successful. To me, there's a kind of a greenish color cast, which probably was present in nature, but to me is a bit of a distraction. The colors of the starfish on the wall above are crisp and clear, whereas in the reflection, it's a little bit muddier, and it's hard to make a one-to-one correlation between the figures the starfish up above with the ones in the water below. Unlike in the previous image where the reflection of the spoonbill was absolutely flawless. At least on my monitor, there is a slight greenish color cast, particularly in the water, which I think if removed would make the image more effective.
Okay, Star Reflections scored 20.
Right. Next image is Storm over Tufus, critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
To me, I love clouds, and if I had a muse, they would be clouds themselves. It appears to me that the image is just a little bit overcooked, meaning that the foreground, the sage in the foreground, and the tufa themselves just seem to be a little bit too over processed, and in all honesty, compete with the beautiful clouds in the sky.
Okay, Storm over Tufa scored 19.
Right, and the next image is The Apparition. This is critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I like how graphic this is and how abstracted it is, and the detail of the skyscrapers. The scale from white to black is really well done. And then the contrast between it and this cloud-like apparition in the upper left, which I don't know if this is a composited image or not, but there's something very compelling about the contrast between the hard edge of the buildings and the softness of this cloud-like figure, if you could call it that. And I also like the negative space shapes that are created by the black and let's just call it sky, but the black sky area in and of itself creates an interesting shape. So I think it's a successful abstracted sort of combination between a straight photograph and a composite.
All right, thank you. The Apparition scored 26.
Next image is The Trail Back, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Okay, this is a very, I guess I would describe it as a pleasant landscape. But to me, there's no compelling element in it that really draws my attention or makes it completely unique. I think that the leading line of the trail, which is mentioned in the title, is interesting. I think it might have been more effective if the photographer had either picked a different part of the trail or perhaps gotten down lower to include more of the trail in the frame, so it really did draw you into the landscape. Chris likes clouds. I like clouds too. And to me, these clouds look like they have been a little bit over-processed. I think some clarity or something has been added so that they lose their fluffiness. They're rather hard-edged. And I think that has something to do with the processing.
Okay, the trailback scored 19.
All right, and the next image is Total Confusion, critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
When I looked at this image, first of all, I realized that it was surreal, or it was a conceptual idea. The one thing I found fascinating is that we have a person on an electrical pole, and to me, electricity and danger and all that. Yet we have this graphical element that goes through it that kind of looks like a bolt of lightning, that is yellow, but they didn't take the advantage of making it lightning yellow. It seemed to be kind of muted. And since this is sort of a fantasy type photograph, I just would have pushed it even further over the edge and brought the idea that yellow space is energy, is lightning throughout the photograph. So to me, if you are going to leverage the idea that this is surreal, I might just go ahead and go a little bit further in the processing in terms of that yellow.
Okay, thank you. Total Confusion scored 19.
Next photograph is Tree of Life, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
I think this is a good image from a storytelling point of view, with this lone surviving tree in this forest of burnt out relics. But to me, it's visually it's busy. I think it would have been more effective had the living tree had been juxtaposed with a different angle, with a single or perhaps two dead trees. There's a lot in this image that is not in focus. There's a lot of brush on the left-hand side of the frame that's not in focus and not contributing. And there's right in the middle of the frame, there's a vertical out of focus branch. Also, the kind of bald sky is not doing the photographer any favor. I think either a different vantage point would really have helped this, and perhaps a different crop.
Okay, thank you. Tree of Life scored 18. And for the open category, we have 11 accepted images. California, Jeff Lipschitz. Dawn at Hendry's Beach, Ron Abeles. Garden Fresh, Dave Basso. Gentle Touch, Stephen Sherrill. Goleta Slough, Bill Banning. Hangers On, Stuart Wilson. In Peril, Judith Barrett. Neowise Triptych, Ron Williams. Peekaboo, Bill Hallier. Spoonbill, Chris Seaton. And The Apparition, Bob Rottenberg.
Kimberly, just for your, that was a straight image.
Wow, that's great. So that was
It was
that
a real cloud.
wow, that was really great. Nicely done.
All right, we have people and prints to do, and then 3 more unscored. So we'll move right into the next one. The first image for the people category is Change of Socks, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
This reminds me of journalistic photographs we were doing years and years ago, where you were out on the streets and you just wanted to grab a part of what was going on. And so in that regard, I like the contrast. I like the fact that you can see the hole in his socks, the fact that the photographer captured this right at that moment where the shoe has come off. He's clearly, well, maybe it's not clear. Somehow in my mind, I thought, did he ride his bicycle in and then have to stop and take his shoe off? But the one thing I found myself thinking was, I don't really need to see the box in the lower left. I don't even really need to see a lot of that bicycle. It's enough to, if the bicycle's part of the story, it's enough to see the front wheel and some of the handlebars. So this photograph could be heavily cropped and you would still have the story, and you would still have all of the range from the highlights to the shadows, and the entire story would be told. So I think this is really more than anything an issue of needing to be heavily cropped.
Okay, thank you. Change of socks scored 21.
Next image is Gia, G-I-A, and critiqued by Chris Broughton.
You know, one of the interesting things about this image, if you look directly behind her, it's got such a wonderful background element to it that it almost matches the sequins of her dress. And to me, the hard horizontal hedge line at the top is just a little distracting. It pulls my attention away. And I would simply just extend that background that's behind her face up to the top of the frame, just so it doesn't cause me a reason to pause. You know, the backlight with the on-camera flash, I enjoy this slight motion blur to me that she's spinning and this is captured. For portrait lighting, having a very hard specular light on camera access is hard to do, and it's not as flattering as maybe a slightly diffuse light source, a beauty dish. You could still get the same direction, but I think it didn't do her any disjustice in terms of what hard lighting can actually do to a person. I love the balance of the backlit edge light. You know, to me, you have a key light, and if you add an edge light, that's, whether it's natural or man-made, is just another sophisticated layer of creating depth and dimensionality in a portrait.
All right, thank you. Gia scored 20.
Next photograph is Girl with the Yellow Cap, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't have that in my notes, but I'll jump in. I think the image is the yellow of the cap. Although it's a portrait, the yellow of the cap takes you right there with color. It takes you there with texture. And then you find yourself migrating over to the facial expression. And, you know, I find myself wondering, is she a spectator somewhere? She looks bored. She looks like she's been there for a while. There's some irritation going on. So there's tension in the whole thing that I think is also pulled together by those vertical, I don't know if it's a bar or what's in the background that reiterates the gray of her shirt. And the only thing that I find myself jumping around with and wanting to eliminate is that white reflection that's in the middle of the right-hand side that hits the yellow cap. And then below that, there's kind of a red frame that is distracting. So if the background, if that gray background was simply copied over so that you're not pulled away in any way toward the right. And then on the left side, that there's a light line that goes from her chin down to the bottom of the frame that's not helping things either. But the skin tone's beautiful. The color of the hat really jumps everything about it into something more interesting.
Okay, thank you. Girl with a yellow cap scored 18.
Next photograph is Murcia, Spain, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
This is a wonderful subject. These clan-like clerics, I guess they are. They look like they're photographed on the street. And to me, it's like you see this wonderful, striking subject, and you click off that kind of first frame, so you know you have it. But then you have to look for the picture in the picture, because the way this is captured, there are just so many distractions. It's shot on the street. There's this kind of bright gold altarpiece, or I don't know if it's a float or something clerical in the backdrop. There's a bright red structure. I don't know if it's a sign or a firebox or whatever. And then there's a balcony with some people. So there's just too much going on in this frame. And yet there are a lot of pictures in this picture. I can imagine a tight crop of one of these figures, including only the eye holes and the gloves and the mallet and the cross. I can imagine the fellow on the kind of center right, who's glancing off to the side. He kind of intrigues me, looking at one of his compatriot clansmen. But as a shot, there's just too much going on in this frame.
All right, thank you. Murcia, Spain scored 19.
Next photograph is MoMA Patron, and this is critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I really like this as a portrait submission because the figure is such a small part of the frame, and yet you have this interesting juxtaposition to the Dorothea Lange exhibition signage, and Dorothea was so known for doing portraits, and then the words are sort of intriguing. The fact that the whole thing's in black and white, which is primarily what she shot, and that the figure he doesn't look like he's entering, he just looks like he's waiting, and he's looking not toward the signage or the entry of it. He's looking off to the side, and he's just waiting. And, everything about it, it's got a lot of really interesting angles to it. And I think it lends itself very well to being black and white, from the words to even the gray space of the floor. It's and the abstraction of all the shapes. It's very well balanced.
Okay, thank you. MoMA Patron scored 24.
Next photograph is Reverie. This is critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
To me, what's fascinating about this is it is a very ethereal type image. Obviously, this is not reality. We have motion, we have blur. Boy, I just want to take my mouse and point you where I want you to look. What I question is, how come there's such a hard edge on the doorway? In other words, if everything has movement and motion, why on the right-hand side is the doorway so hard lined? In other words, it doesn't have this dreamscape. It has this hard window frame. I just thought that if that was softened up a little bit and the reflection of rushing water in the lower right-hand side was maybe a little less obtrusive, to bring us back to looking at her and have the gaze going out.
Okay, thank you. Reverie scored 23.
Next photograph is Seen It All, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Well, she certainly has seen it all. This is a wonderful face. Having the age lines and wrinkles. She's kind of gazing off into space. I certainly don't think she necessarily has to be looking at the photographer, but the expression is a little, let's say, quizzical. I love portraits and any photograph done either by door light or window light, and this looks like it was shot by one of the other. But the lighting, for some reason, doesn't have that soft quality that you usually associate with a window light. Perhaps this is south window light, so it's rather harsh, and the lighting on the face almost has, I don't know if you've ever seen those snapshots with what they call horror lighting, where there's a strong light from below the figure, and it's very, very harsh. And the eyes, although there's a considerable sparkle in them, they seem to be sunken within the head. The lips are dark. So it's kind of bright where I don't want it to be bright, and dark where I don't want it to be dark, except along the edge of the hair, which is quite beautiful. There's one other thing that troubles me a little bit with this is a person, I assume, of certainly Asian, probably Southeast Asian, and the skin tones just, to me, are just not right. They're too orange. And it looks the same on this as it did on my monitor on the Flickr site. They just don't look like they belong to this person.
All right, thank you. Seen it all, scored 23.
Next image is Stepping Out, critiqued by Chris Broughton.
I was hoping I didn't get this one because, but let me be honest. I have a high school teenager female, and to me this photograph is a little objectification of her. While she's a beautiful woman, to me the camera position is at head high, and if you're going to shoot fashion, if you're going to shoot beauty, you're going to get the camera down and shoot center of mass, so you balance out the proportions from the top to the bottom. And to me, this reminds me of being in high school and photographing the opposite sex, that we forgot that she's got a wingsuit of palm trees coming out of her back. And to me, if this was shot with a 50mm f1.2, you dropped the camera position, you worked with the lines going back in the hallway, I think it would work, because she is very beautiful. It has very beautiful light on her. But to me, I'm like, okay, why is a person in a bikini walking down a hallway? Should she not be at a different location that kind of supports the narrative of the story? And I just feel that this photograph is a beautiful person in a location that doesn't necessarily work with the photograph.
Okay, thank you. Stepping Out scored 18.
Next photograph is Street Photographer, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I really liked this image as a portrait. He looks like if he's not a pro, he looks like he's seriously involved with shooting. I like the fact that he's got it looks like a cigar in his mouth. It's daytime, but technically it's almost as if there's something not quite right about the contrast. I mean, the white is white, and the black of the camera lens is black, but it's like the 3/4 range into the dark needs to be shifted around in some way. And for example, I can't really see what his hand is doing, his right hand on the camera. So I wanted the contrast range to be set up better. And then, but I do like the angle. I like that this was shot from way low looking up, so that he looks very monumental with the sky behind him. I I like the fact that against his black shirt, he's got an apple white earbuds that kind of creates this really interesting diagonal line that goes up to the white cap. And so to me, it was just, I kept finding myself just wanting that contrast to be adjusted correctly. I couldn't get past that.
Okay, thank you. Street photographer scored 21.
Next, we have Strike a Pose, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
I think the photographer tried to do a little bit too much with this image. Is it a landscape or is it a portrait? I think he did very well, or he or she did very well to pick this individual. I don't know if it's a friend or just a person they came across, but obviously it's somebody who wanted to have their picture taken. The lighting is really a problem here. The landscape is overexposed and the subject is underexposed. And there's a lot in this subject that's of interest. There's the tats, there's the wonderful leather vest, there's the bandana, the shades. He looks like a character and he's deserving of a portrait all by himself, not with the landscape in the background and the very, very bright railing that he is posed against. A lot of the problems could have been solved with exposure just by turning him 90 degrees or maybe 180 degrees towards the light. This is obviously shot either early morning or more likely late in the day, and the light, the sun is kind of low in the horizon. So if he had just been turned around, he would have been much better lit. This is also a person with, shall we say, a lot of attitude, and I think that a better pose could have been chosen to show off that attitude. Have him facing you in a kind of confrontational way, or with his legs and arms crossed. Feature those tattoos and his garments, and I think it would have been a really effective picture because he's an interesting fellow.
Okay, thank you. Strike a Pose scored 17.
Next photo is Sunday Market in Oaxaca, critiqued by Chris Broughton.
So to me, you know, we've got this wonderful procession of people, but within this procession, we have an individual who looks out of place. She's dressed in different attire, and I don't feel that it's a juxtaposition. In other words, I don't think the photographer is trying to show these two different generations together. So I might just figure out a way to eliminate the person on the right. And that's going to be tough because if they walk through at the same time, there's nothing that you could do to get rid of her. You know, I played around with different crops. I couldn't figure out a way, but to me, it's the other generation in the photograph that's detracting from the three wonderful ladies that are strolling through the market. You know, street photography is one of those things that it is not capturing a moment; it's anticipating the moment before it happens and trying to get ahead of these ladies. Maybe you could have figured out a way to eliminate the person on the right-hand side.
Thank you. Sunday Market in Oaxaca scored 18.
Next photo is Surfing, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
I really like this shot. I like the fact that the horizon is tilted in much the same way that the knee is, that the fact that this is so tack sharp literally everywhere, including from the water droplets in the very close foreground all the way to the infinity. And it's just full of action everywhere you look. It's just all about action, including this tilted horizon angle. And I thought it was fun. And I just really like it.
Okay, Surfing scored 20.
Next photo is Thanks, Grandma, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
This is a wonderful moment. It's extremely spontaneous. The expression on Grandma's face, looking very intently on this young man who I'm guessing is her grandson, is wonderful. Her pose is wonderful. I love her hands. I love her feet. In addition to her face. So I think it's just a wonderful moment. If I were to do anything with this image, I think it looks like the clarity slider has been boosted just a hair too much. The highlights are a little bit bright. And I think it's a very minor point. I might have cropped a little bit off the left-hand side of the frame so that the frame ended with that green stripe rather than the kind of gray black edge. But all in all, it's a wonderful moment, very spontaneous, and a really nice street shot.
All right, thanks, Grandma, scored 21.
Next photo is The Accordionist. This is critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
Quite a graphic image, balancing the space between the hard linear lines and the little circular dots of the keys on the accordion. In terms of a black and white image, I think this screams make me black and white. I just would sell the vertical lines a little bit more in terms of contrast, meaning that I would have dodged or lightened the lighter areas and darkened the areas in between there, just to kind of accentuate the depth and dimensionality of the actual pleats of the accordion itself. I mean, when you really look at the hands almost look like cast pieces of bronze.
Okay, thank you. The Accordionist scored 23.
Next image is The Gentle Touch, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
This is just a classic shot of, you know, how do you light and get the skin of a baby and the skin of an adult to look and feel like skin, particularly in color. And so the lighting just has a beautiful softness that really captures and conveys the skin tones. And I think that the pink color that goes, you know, classically with the baby, the glint from the woman's ring hand, married ring hand, telling a story about family, I suppose. And then the way her hand sort of replicates and duplicates the fold of the baby's hand, you know, almost like a concept of reflecting generation. And it also, because of the way it's lit, there's a very nice quietness to it. And so I think it's very well done.
All right, thank you. The Gentle Touch scored 22.
Next photograph is Tormented, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
This is obviously a stage play, and the lighting is, as Tony Soprano says, it is what it is. It's stage lighting. It's quite dramatic, but it looks like stage lighting. The moment that is captured is obviously quite dramatic. The expression on the two characters' faces kind of says it all. But there are a couple of problems that I see both in this image and in the way it presented on the Flickr. And by the way, the images tonight, Bill, from your screen are way sharper and way better than they looked on the Flickr site. So I don't know how you fix that, but they look much, much better. When I look at this image closely, It's not tack sharp, particularly the figure in the back. And I'm not sure if that's motion blur or perhaps there's been a lot of noise reduction on this image, which kind of gives it a little bit of a plasticky feeling. Also, I think this image is all about moment and gesture, and the fact that I don't mind that the feet and lower legs are cut off the figure in front. In fact, the diagonal of the legs and knees are quite effective in focusing our attention. But I am troubled by the fact that his right arm is cut off, because I think it's important in the moment and in his gesture, in the emotion that he's trying to convey.
Okay, thank you. Tormented scored 19. That completes the people category, and we have 8 accepted images. Change of socks, Carrie Topliff. MoMA patron, Deb Gibson. Reverie, Judith Barrett. Seen It All, Bill Hallier. Street photographer, Chris Seaton. Thanks, Grandma, Jeff Lipschitz. The accordionist, Bob Rottenberg. The Gentle Touch, Bob Wagner.
So the next category is print submissions. And for the first time since we've been doing virtual exhibitions, these images weren't available on Flickr. They were judged entirely based on the print qualities that were mailed to the judges. So the first of the print images is Flight Flurry, and this is critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
And I have the print right here. So, to me, the print itself, it's a little heavy. It's pushed down. One of the things that I think is really important when we make prints is that we maximize the luminosity, and to me, the whites are a little bit heavy. The screen that you're seeing is a little bit lighter, and this is understanding the translation between the screen and the piece of paper. And right behind me is one of my big printers, and to me the translation that occurs is often a challenge. But for me, the end goal is this. This is an object. This is something that is a piece of art because it's an object. You don't go to museums and look at screens right now. They collect objects, and to be able to translate your digital file, your film or whatever to a print is difficult because the print is the most limiting factor. And while this image, I really enjoy it, I just wish it was a little bit lighter. In terms of composition, I wish that there was either space on the right side or space on the left side, just to get the ball of energy away from the symmetry of the flock itself. To me, the single bird towards the bottom that is the lightest seems to draw my most visual attention to. And I would think about that in my compositional space on whether I wanted to, if I had a little bit of space to the right or to the left.
All right, thank you. Flight Flurry scored 21.
Next print is Generations, critiqued by Kimberly Cavish.
You know, it's funny because I looked at this before you had the Flickr thing set up. And so there was no directive on what the orientation of this was supposed to be. And so I rotated it around and found myself wanting it to be, from this perspective, wanting it to be rotated 90 degrees to the right, with the flower on the bottom and the bud on the top. So so I'm almost disoriented looking at it, how you've now projected it, which is sort of an interesting thing. But it's just tack sharp and the color's beautiful. The print, I thought the print was really beautifully done. And the only thing, and maybe it's, maybe there's a reason why the insects are key from the photographer's point of view, and I would certainly be receptive to hearing good argument for that. But for me, the bug life in this orientation, the bug life that's on the left between those two leaves is just distracting, and everything else about the photograph is so clean and sharp that I would have taken those out. And there's another bug, I think, in the very center as well, because I'm not so sure that they add to the story. And then, you know, I would even suggest that the photographer rotate that print to the right and see what they think. It's pretty great as a vertical.
Okay, thank you. Generations scored 23.
Next print is Rocky Nook Infrared, critiqued by Robert Rottenberg.
Okay. This looks so much better on my screen now than it did on the Flickr site that I wish I could rescore it. The light, this is an image of darks and lights, of highlights and shadows, and as such, I think it works extremely well. The bright highlights in the sky, which are actually, you know, white with no detail, actually work very, very well here because they contrast with the feathery foliage. I think it could use a little bit of cropping on the right side. I think the way the two dominant trees in the foreground frame the light, and the trees in the tree in the middle is where the strongest visual element is. And I would just like to see the right side of the frame cropped in so that diagonal of the tree in the right almost goes to the corner of the frame.
And
I
I just wanted to add one thing, because at least in the prints that I received, this this paper that this photographer chose was really nice. I thought that the paper decision was really well selected for making a print of this image. And then secondly, there was almost a hint of a drop shadow around it that made it lift off the paper, which was a nice effect. But I felt that it would have, if they did everything the same, but just simply used a larger sheet of paper and given the image more space around it, it would have, between the drop shadow and the image itself, it would have made for even a more lovely print.
Okay, thank you. Rocky Nook Infrared scored 20.
Next image is Spinning Stardust, critiqued by Christopher Broughton.
You know, to me, I'm so over pictures of just stars, and to anchor the stars to the landscape, I think is so important. And they put a windmill in there, they put a horizon, and to me, this is so much more interesting than just pictures of the Milky Way galaxy. So kudos to that. I do question the position of the windmill itself. It to me feels a little bit pushed to the corner. In other words, if there was just a little bit more space to the left-hand side of the windmill, I think it would be more pleasing. Be careful, in my print, it seems to be magnified a little bit. The halo that follows the tree along the horizon looks a little bit post-processed, and that could be hidden just so the trees seamlessly go into the sky and we don't have the slight mask of I don't know if it's a clarity slider or I'm not quite sure what it is, but it's just distracting from the beautiful composition that you have of the night sky against the windmill.
All right, thank you. Spinning Stardust scored 21. So for the prints category, we have 3 accepted images. Flight Flurry by Sally Berry. Generations by Ron Abeles. And Spinning Stardust by Ron Williams. And that concludes the scoring categories.
Okay, and just a reminder, these were on Flickr as well, and we know that video clips are notoriously choppy on Zoom. So first one is called Brightness and Contrast Video.
Wacky Photoshop. Photoshop has many tools for manipulating images, but sometimes these tools have unexpected effects. Take this image of a wooden ceiling. Nice image, but it looks a bit dull and needs some pop. One of the first adjustments many people try is brightness and contrast. Let's try that by adding a brightness contrast adjustment layer. Now try clicking Auto. Whoa! The color shifts dramatically. It's become more red and saturated. If you try changing brightness some more, you can create some really toxic and unnatural looking colors. To avoid a color shift, try changing the blending mode of the adjustment layer from normal to luminosity mode. This is a good tip with other adjustments that can also affect brightness and contrast, like curves. We expect that increasing brightness decreases saturation and vice versa, but the brightness control can also shift the color value. Watch what happens to the color as we change the brightness. Look at the histogram at the top right and see if you can figure out why.
Okay, this was assigned to Kimberly Cavish for comments. We always welcome comments from any of the judges on these unscored submissions.
Okay, well, to start with, I think there were a lot of distracting things going on. Rewinding. I'm presuming this was made to be sort of almost an instructive teaching moment. And so from the start, I didn't understand why the title fonts were shifted between 5 or 6 different fonts. Was this to demonstrate that you can change fonts, but there's no explanation for it? There's that. And why it's called Wacky Photoshop as opposed to here's a tip for how to use Photoshop. The other thing that I found problematic was as the voiceover person is speaking, you get a tip flashed up that fills the whole screen. So you find yourself feeling as if you must try to read it, but in fact, it's just reiterating what you're hearing him say. I think it would have been far more effective had the tip box, the printed tip box, as it were, been reduced and been below the image that he's trying to make a point about. And I watched it a few times, and I just kept saying to myself, I don't understand what this video is trying to say, because I didn't feel that the instruction was wacky unless he's choosing to use the word wacky because it sounds more fun. But in fact, if it's an instructive clip, then the title should convey that. Like, here's a tip on luminosity in Photoshop, or I don't know, something like that. Anyway, I found myself somewhat lost.
Other comments? This next one, and you know, unscored images have typically been meant to be anonymous, but we know the voice of the first person, and I know that they've been they wouldn't be any problem with identifying that was Ken Pfeiffer. Bill Charbonneau is a new member. He's from Minnesota. Is it Minnesota? And he wanted us to see this and knew that he did it. This is filmed entirely on an iPhone. Hummingbird moments, and this one was assigned for Chris to comment on.
So when I saw this, it made me reminiscent of thinking about animal locomotion and Edward Muybridge, and how before photography, artists often used study guides to kind of try to figure out how to draw and render a bird or a horse in full motion. Yet here we have a camera that we can actually hold in our pocket. And I found the idea of being able to see something that you can't see with your phone very intriguing. The only other thing that I worry about this is that I worry about sugar. And maybe it's just me. And I see this hummingbird, and is the sugar replicating nectar, or is it bad for a hummingbird like it is bad for me to eat my corn syrup and my soda? So that actually did weigh kind of heavy on my psyche about the photograph that we saw in the beginning of the bird in front of the rose. This was two different things, and then I saw the photograph of the hummingbird. I found it intriguing to hear the sounds because those are things that we don't necessarily experience. But I don't know if that's a hummingbird in real-time sound, or it's a hummingbird slowed down. And this might be the time when a little scientific explanation down at the bottom could have jumped up and given me some Latin terms and made me a science nerd that would have enhanced my learning moment with the video. But I'm sorry, but the sugar thing and hummingbirds worries me, and I guess I'll find out afterwards from my wife if it's okay to give hummingbirds sugar.
All right, we're going to go back to Photoshop to Lightroom real quickly for the last of the unscored images. This is just entitled Slew, and it's signed to Robert Rottenberg.
Okay, this is the first I've seen of this image, and I'm really staring at my monitor to see what it is. And I guess it's a flight of birds taken, I presume, either from a drone or from the top of a cliff. I think graphically it's very interesting. Those strong diagonals from top left to bottom right, that looks a little bit better. Are really interesting. I wish I could see the birds just a little bit better. I can see the lead bird in the middle of the frame at the bottom. The rest for me are kind of a blur. I think perhaps on the original file they would be sharper and more clear cut.
I think this is an oblique angle of a kelp bed in water.
Oh, I'm seeing a bird. You're right. You see, I'm seeing this bird in the middle of the frame at the bottom as a bird. I have birds on my brain. You're right. You're absolutely correct.
That's a wonderful surrealist observation.
All
You know,
right.
to me, the one thing I would say that would be interesting is that looking at some of the images with really long lenses, and there's been a couple of them in the photographs. There was a bird in a tree. If this was rendered with a Nikon Canon 400 2.8, the background rendition would be very different. It would be very pleasing, and it seems a little harsh as the image goes out of focus. And that's just because it wasn't photographed with a $12,000 lens, but I do see the harshness of how things change.
Well, you can see what my comments are worth.
All right. Well, we are finished with our reviews, with our exhibition, and perfect time to say thank you to our judges. And
My pleasure, and hats off to all the hard work.
Bill, are they going to get the comments that we added?
you know, yes, I'm going to get those within the next few days. I will put comments that that were left as part of the scoring into the Flickr album. We'll put the names of the images and the people that took them and get those comments in, and then I'll put out an email to everyone when they're